Right, thank you very much indeed. I have to say I'm delighted to be here. I was lucky enough to be brought up on part of the Norfolk coast in an area of outstanding natural beauty, so I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon. Now what I thought I would do is start off just talking about some of the big macro challenges, some of the global challenges for water. Very quickly get down into what that means for our region, and Charlie will have touched on some of that earlier on today. Then talk about what's the role of a water company in all of this, and how does the water company play in this space. And then get really down to some of the detail about what's going on in the east of England with respect to water resources. And then finish with a few things perhaps for you to ponder about. So let's just start off with some global trends. I think fundamentally the first thing that's worthwhile reflecting on is some of the work that Professor Sir John Beddington did back in 2009. And he reminded us that as a result of population increase across the globe, going up to about 8 billion by 2030, that global demand for food will be up by about 50%. Global demand for power will be up by about 50%. And global demand for water will be up by about 30%. And he characterised this as the perfect storm. What he meant by that was those are quite significant in their own right, but when you add them together, food, power, water, there could be all kinds of interesting consequences for us on this planet. And it reminds us that we're already living off future capital, several times the planet's resources already today. So that's on one area. The second area is just the whole issue of uncertainty. I think we will all struggle to understand what the future looks like, and it's much more difficult than it's ever been to really anticipate and plan for what the future picture might look like. There's a guy I like, Richard Watson, who was the author of Future Files, for those of you who know him, and he pulls out several themes about how the world's changing and why we will struggle to predict how things are going to look in the future. China, 20% of the world's population, 1.8% of the fossil fuel. China will be at the global drive for energy, for commodities, for food, and of course for power. Across the world, of all of those people aged 65 or older that have ever lived, 50% of them are alive today. So what does that mean? Well, it means ultimately there's a lot more people on the planet, but it also means there might be changes in terms of how society works, differences between younger and older generations. Will we become more risk averse? Who knows? Technology, you know what's going on here. 4 billion mobile phones, close on 1 billion Facebook accounts, power shifting away maybe from companies and governments to individuals. And technology continues to be a big accelerator of change. Back in the mid-80s, you could buy a PC. Today, you can buy one that's 32,000 times more powerful and 12 times cheaper than that PC you buy in the mid-80s. So all of those things are making it very difficult to anticipate what future society will look like. And then if you roll in climate change, climate change will bring lots of things, not least uncertainty. And sometimes it's not even in the obvious areas. I mean, for example, one of the consequences of climate change could be the movement of agriculture to more northern latitudes, and yes, that means our part of the world. So, first bit, big pressures on global resources. Second bit, lots of uncertainty and difficulties in planning for that. And the third thing, just to remind everybody, is water is already a precious global resource. Of all the water on the planet, 2.5% of it is actually fresh water. So of all the water on the planet, 2.5% of it is fresh water. Of that 2.5%, 70% of that is locked up in the Arctic, the Antarctic, or in mountainous regions you can't get at. So actually there isn't that much fresh water already on the planet. 40% of the world's population today live in water scarce areas, and an eighth of the world's population today don't have access to clean, safe drinking water. So these aren't problems for the future, these are problems globally for today. So, what does that mean for us in the region? Well, actually in many ways, the east of England is a microcosm of some of those global challenges. So let's start off thinking about growth of population. We're anticipating, over the next 25 years, having to supply about 900,000 more people in Anglian Water's region. That's about 20% increase on what we currently supply. That is going to put additional pressure on resources, and I'll come back to that. In terms of climate change, just picking that dimension, if we take the UK SIP medium emission scenario, and we look out to 2080, what we see is 40% less rainfall in the summer. So 40% less rainfall in the summer, 33% more rainfall in the winter, and a lot more uncertainty in what those patterns actually look like. As we know, the Met Office had a conference a few weeks ago and brought everybody together to talk about climate change. And apart from agreeing that we're going to have lots and lots of dodgy summers for the next 10 to 15 years, which appears to be wrong, they also agree fundamentally uncertainty is one of the biggest factors in climate change moving forwards. And just to give you an idea of uncertainty, March last year we'd had a couple of years really of the driest weather that we'd seen in the region for 100 years. But also last year, the Highlands and Islands of Scotland started to experience water shortages. A couple of years before that, the northwest of the country were anticipating hosepipe bans. And even in March last year, the distillery that does my favourite single malt, Glenfarclas, which is a Speyside distillery, March last year they said they've seen the most unusual climate that they've ever seen in the last 170 years. They were not getting the usual miserly rain that they like to see for getting the decent water that they need for their single malt. It had been incredibly dry, the driest that they'd seen it for 170 years. And in March this time last year, they were genuinely worried about whether they were going to have enough water to keep in production. So all sorts of odd things going on, and we're already a region that's incredibly dry, 600 millimetres of rain a year, about the same as Jerusalem. 20% of the region beneath sea level. And that move of water-intensive agriculture maybe to more northern climes could be something that impacts us. Other aspects which are worth mentioning, energy. The reserve margin, the regulator for the energy industry, Ofgem, talks about the reserve margin dropping down from 4% to 2%. This is pretty relevant because in the east of England we have to pump everything, it's very flat. So how much energy there is and energy security is really relevant, not just the price of water, but actually the ability to move water around and use it. And of course in terms of food, Lord Krebs reflected on last year's pattern of climate going from extreme dry to extreme wet, and basically noted that normally we export a certain amount of wheat, and last year we imported the same amount we normally export. So really big impacts. So what? What does that mean for a water company? For a water company, what do we do about this? Well, one of the things that we said a few years ago as Anglian Water was we need to change the role of the water company. We can't sit in glorious isolation of all of these challenges. And also, and perhaps more importantly than that, the water company on its own can't answer all of these challenges. We need to work differently. So we started our new leadership platform, which we call Love Every Drop. And we issued a manifesto, and there were lots of commitments that we made there, lots of detail which you're interested to see. Our progress against it, if you go on our website, you can go and have a look at how we're getting on. But essentially, the thing of the day is it was a different role that we thought a water company should be playing in this region. So what's that all about? Well, three basic levels to it. Clouds, crowds and customers. Clouds is about innovating, driving much more innovation in the way we're thinking, not doing things the same way we've always done them. Crowds is about recognising the need to collaborate, the need to work much more closely with many, many organisations. And customers, that was recognising that increasingly we needed to encourage customers to use less, to be more careful in what they were actually doing. We couldn't do that in the traditional ways, which would be just to tell customers what was good for them. We had to work and engage with customers very differently. So those sort of three dimensions. And if I just dip into those very briefly. In terms of clouds, what does that mean? Essentially it means moving away as a water company from being what we wanted to be before, which was a silent service, and saying, no, we don't want to be a silent service, we want to be quite noisy. We need to be quite noisy because what we need to be doing is we need to be working on some of the big issues that affect the east of England. So for example, we've done an awful lot of work on how we might trade water between agriculture, industry, public water supply, and what that might mean for the environment and agriculture and customers and business. We've set up a water innovation network where we've got 350 companies, largely SMEs, working with us and challenging us on perhaps some traditional ways that we thought about things, and taken something like 120 ideas, new ideas into our business. We've worked hard with those people making legislation to ensure that there's a resilience duty set in, enshrined for our economic regulator Ofwat. So you don't look at things purely through an economic lens, you recognise that resilience to the impact of climate change is really important. And that is something that features in the water bill as it's going through at the moment. And we've set in train a number of very, very big challenges for ourselves where we've tried to move a step change in thinking. A great example would be, we build lots of stuff, and we said, wouldn't it be a real crime if all the stuff we were building still continued to use as much carbon as it used to? It's one thing continuing to use energy, but what about building things out of concrete and using carbon as we've always used to? So he said, what we'd like to do is take the performance over the last few years and halve the amount of carbon that we put into new things we build, as well as reducing the cost of them by about 20%. I can tell you today, after only 3 and a bit years into that, we've reduced the carbon on everything we're building as an average by 40%, and we've taken over 20% of the cost out. It means totally different ways of building treatment works, water, wastewater, totally different ways of doing pipelines, but it's been driven by that fundamentally we need to move to a different place, a step change, not just a bit of incremental change. Crowds, well, this is about collaboration, and there are many, many examples here, many, many organisations. We're working with all of them to one extent or another. But a great example would be how we're starting to think about water resource management planning. Traditionally, a water company would say, well, we sort our water resource management plan out here, that's it, we'll do it all, and we'll sort of hand it over and hope that it gets a tick in the box from DEFRA and the Environment Agency. We recognise, for us in the east of England, what we need to do is take a different approach. And we are working on the first multi-sector water resource management plan, where we think about water needs for agriculture, water needs for business, water needs for the environment, water needs for public water supply, trying to bring those together. So can we come up with a different kind of approach? That would be a good example. There are many others, not least the work that we're all doing on catchment management. These are all things that traditionally maybe we would have done on our own and thought about it just from a water company perspective, all things that need a different kind of approach. In terms of customers, this fundamentally is about how do you actually change customer behaviour? How do you actually get customers maybe to use less of your product and convince them that it's not bad for a water company if you're on a meter for you to be using less water? Well, you certainly don't do it the way that we used to do it, which is send them a leaflet and hope that they read it and hope that they actually respond to it. You have to engage very differently and engage at a community level. We've had some fantastic success with a couple of big campaigns. One was called Drop 20, which we ran last year, which was trying to encourage customers to save water. And we saved, at the peak, about 30-odd Olympic-sized swimming pools of water a day as a result of that initiative. And the second one is Keep It Clear, which is where we're trying to stop people putting things down the sink and down the loo, that causes blockages on our sewage system and leads to flooding and pollution, all of which is very negative, but ultimately very difficult to police over a network of 65,000 kilometres of sewer. The good news in all of these is we found different ways of engaging with customers. We found different ways of engaging with communities that are generating really significant changes to the way that we run our business. But it's a long journey. It's certainly not a linear journey. It's one that goes up and down. But we're making good progress, and we were delighted last week to be one of only 5 companies in the country to be shortlisted as Company of the Year by Business in the Community. But where next? And here's an interesting one. For us, it's about completing the water cycle. For water companies, we often talk about sewage treatment or wastewater treatment. And one of the things that we've come to realise is there is no such thing as wastewater treatment in the east of England. So if we think about some of the big rivers, some of the biggest rivers in the region, in the summer, a third of the baseload flow of those rivers is from wastewater treatment works. In Norfolk and Suffolk and Essex, there are brooks, streams that would not exist were there not a wastewater treatment works at the head of those in the summer. There is no such thing as wastewater in the east of England. So one of the things that we have started doing in our business is to redefine wastewater. We're talking about recycling, because that is the reality of what goes on in the east of England. We have to make best use of what we've got. And it isn't about wastewater, it's about recycling what water we've got. And a very simple, quick example. In the drought last year, one of the ideas we had was to take the wastewater, the recycled water, out of sewage treatment works for Flag Fen, for Peterborough, and to actually put it a bit further up the river and then abstract it and put it back into Rutland Water as a way of freeing up about 45 megalitres a day of water, so 20 odd Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water a day. The problem with that was apart from the pipe and the cost and all the rest of it, which weren't the real problems, the problem was actually that particular flow of water was pretty fundamental to the Nen washes and the habitats there. So all of a sudden this wastewater had a significant environmental value. So we can't just think about it in traditional ways that we do. We have to think about things differently. What do our customers think about this? Well, actually, when we've talked to our customers, we're in a very big exercise at the moment, talking to our customers about our next 5 years business plan. They get this, they understand the logic of moving to talk about water in terms of recycling and not just wastewater. If that leads to people valuing water, it's got to be a good thing. So, to some of the big challenges, 2040, our water resource management planning timeframe. And Charlie will have touched on some of this, but I've picked up a whole of England's region here, not just the line strictly in the east. What are some of the challenges? Well, there are a number of 3 particular challenges for water. First of all, there's the increase in demand from population. Clearly, more people means the potential to use more water. Secondly, there's a reduction in the availability of the water because of the impact on the environment. You know, what were called sustainability reductions, the need to actually reduce the amount of water we take out of the environment, not increase it. And the third thing is that the impact of climate change, because whilst you might say net the amount of water might be the same, the different patterns of when water is landing on the ground make huge differences to our assumptions in terms of water resource management. And if you add those 3 things together, I mean, essentially that left-hand column adds up to about 254 megalitres a day of water. That's about 125 Olympic swimming pools worth of water a day not being there. On the right-hand side, that adds up to about 540 megalitres a day, maybe 250 Olympic-sized swimming pools a day. So these are the sort of challenges that the region faces. Just to give some context, the left-hand side column would amount to about 24% of the amount of water that we put into supply today. You know, if I look at what we're putting into supply today, about 24%, right-hand column about double that. So very significant potential impact. So what? Well, what do we do? What do we do in the face of that? There are lots of things that we can do, and the water resource management plan that we're consulting on at the moment thinks about this sort of balance. And in essence, Anglian has always had what we would call a twin track approach. So we don't just look at where we might get more water, we also look at how we might reduce demand. So one side is supply, the other side is demand. So twin track approach. And just to show you the impact of the twin track approach, a simple stat. Last year, we put less water into supply as a company as a whole than we did before privatisation. So last year we put less water into supply than we did before privatisation. And that's despite a 20% increase in the number of houses that we supply in the region over that period. So that's 1989 to the present day, 20% increase in the number of houses, yet last year less water went into supply. And it's been like that for the last few years, in fact. So the demand side does work, does have potential. On the other side, on the supply side, I think Charlie touched on this earlier, there are opportunities to recycle. I mean, here in Ipswich, Cliff Key Sewage Works discharges its wastewater, what we call recycled water, but it's lost. There's no net environmental benefit to it, it's lost to the environment. There are opportunities to do something different there. Likewise, there are opportunities to store water, not just above ground in new reservoirs, but also below ground. Artificial aquifer recharge, or some aquifers which are very well to store water underground when you've got it. So there are lots of options, and one of the things in the Water Resource Management Plan is trying to balance those things and come up with what makes sense from a resilience point of view, but also from a cost point of view. And in a nutshell, that is sort of what the Water Resource Management Plan talks about. It talks about the work on the demand side. Simple example, in this current period, we're going into houses, it'll be nearly 100,000 houses over this 5-year period, retrofitting new shower heads and other devices in those houses, and already that is saving us per house 40 litres. So you retrofit one shower head in the average house, it saves 40 litres for that house per day. And we're doing that in areas where we think we've got the greatest water scarcity. So it isn't just about driving leakage down to leading levels as you'd expect us to do, it's about driving water efficiency behaviour, but doing things in a practical way which hopefully helps customers to make the change. It's also about moving water around, interconnectivity within the region, and it's interconnectivity with other regions. Because the one thing that's difficult in this is planning for where the water shortages might be. You know, we have lots of different scenarios about where the water shortages might be, but they could be wrong. It's as simple as that, they could be wrong. So what we actually have to do is anticipate a whole series of different scenarios and then build systems that are resilient. And in essence, what does that mean? It means the ability to move water around, interconnectivity, to deal with things that perhaps don't work out originally as everybody has thought through. So that uncertainty point I made right at the back is really important as we think about planning, and resilience is really the answer. It isn't about planning as we used to do in the past. In the past we would say we know where the population is going to grow, we know exactly what the rainfall is going to be looking like, we have all sorts of assumptions, we build in a bit of headroom and that would be it. This day and age what we actually have to do is develop a whole series of different scenarios as to how things might be, and then say, if any of these scenarios came to pass, what actually would be the best strategy, what's the best water supply strategy? And, before I get to that one, just a reminder for me that one of the things that we're doing at the moment is consulting on our water resource management plan. So if you're interested, please go on our website, you'll see the links there. Do have your input, do take part in that, because we're giving essentially everybody the document to look at, and you can see the trade-offs in there, and you can have your say. But we're also doing that as part of our business plan. And some of these goals we've got here are additional goals that we're building in to our long-term plans that we think are terribly important when we're talking to customers about, because at the end of the day, our customers pay the bill. We want to have absolutely fundamentally engaged with the challenges for the region. And last, just for things perhaps to consider, I think the first quote is Henry Ford. You know, probably goes back to that clouds idea. If we carried on doing things as we've always done, whether it be water resource management planning or thinking about building things with lots of carbon, we'll get the same answer we've always got. Maybe think differently. Collaborating, I think that was Isaac Newton who made that observation, but essentially it's fundamentally critical to us being successful in the East of England is the ability to collaborate very, very widely and with different organisations than perhaps we've ever done before. And the last one, transforming, I mean essentially that's about doing something. And I think if you want to have a look at some of the things we're doing, go on our website, have a look at Love Every Job, have a look at the commitments we made, and have a look at the progress we're making. So it's real, tangible action, it's not just some sort of corporate whitewash over the top. Super, thank you very much.